Hello and welcome back to India Today Global. I'm sure that you have all been tracking the India-Canada story extremely closely. This massive diplomatic meltdown, confrontation between India and Canada. India withdrawing its High Commissioner from Canada as well as several other diplomats. India has also expelled several Canadian diplomats, including the Deputy High Commissioner as well as the Acting High Commissioner from the Canadian High Commission in New Delhi. Really, you could not think that India-Canada relations would sink any lower than this, but they have. But we updated you with all the latest news last night. Let's tell you what's happened throughout this evening. The big news: Prime Minister Justin Trudeau of Canada, flanked on both sides by Melanie Joly, his foreign minister, as well as his minister of, as well as another senior minister, comes in front of the Canadian Parliament, in front of the Canadian press corps today, and explains the nature of the charges against India, as well as making his political statement on what's happening. Please do listen in. We've got those bites, and then let's talk about what Trudeau said.
On Canadian soil, we responded. I think it is obvious that the government of India made a fundamental error in thinking that they could engage in supporting criminal activity against Canadians here on Canadian soil, whether it be murders or extortion or other violent acts. It is absolutely unacceptable for any country, any democracy that upholds the rule of law. That is why we have taken such significant measures, why the RCMP chose to come out today and disrupt the pattern of Indian diplomats collecting through questionable and illegal means information on Canadian citizens that were then fed to criminal organizations that would then take violent actions from extortion to murder against Canadians. No country, particularly not a democracy that upholds the rule of law, can accept this fundamental violation of its sovereignty. Canada fully accepts and respects the sovereignty and the territorial integrity of India. We expect India to do the same. In this case, they did not. I think, as the RCMP Commissioner stated earlier, they have clear and compelling evidence that agents of the Government of India have engaged in and continue to engage in activities that pose a significant threat to public safety. This includes clandestine information gathering techniques, coercive behavior targeting South Asian Canadians, and involvement in over a dozen threatening and violent acts, including murder. Canada is a country rooted in the rule of law, and the protection of our citizens is paramount. That's why, when our law enforcement and intelligence officials began pursuing credible allegations that agents of the Government of India were directly involved in the killing of a Canadian citizen, Hardeep Singh Nijjar, on Canadian soil.
So an absolutely headline-making statement there, with Prime Minister Justin Trudeau telling Canadian audiences that they have substantial proof that agents of the Government of India were in fact involved in the assassination of, in several criminal activities, as they are saying, in criminal activities targeting members of the South Asian diaspora, really the pro-Khalistan supporters that reside in Canada, and of course the major point of contention being that the Canadian government had reached out to the Government of India and said that it has identified 6 Indian diplomats serving in Canada who are persons of interest in these ongoing investigations. Remember that the Canadian police in its statement said that over a dozen such cases have been found where they believe agents of the Government of India are linked to violence, or sorry, there are over a dozen cases where there have been violence against members of the South Asian diaspora, particularly those from the pro-Khalistan movement, and they're investigating links between India as well as criminal gangs that were used to carry out violence, threats, intimidation, and even assassination against these people. This is the Canadian version of events, so this is exactly what we're just going to relay to you, and we'll of course talk to you about the Indian version of events as well. So this is what we're hearing at this point in time. Justin Trudeau saying that the Canadian government has this evidence, making clear that it wants India to respect international law and not undertake these extrajudicial operations and threaten to kill Canadian citizens on its soil. Justin Trudeau also calling for India to cooperate in this investigation. He said that India has used misleading rhetoric on this matter, and this evidence that we've provided you cannot be ignored. It is up to India now to respond and show that it will uphold the rule of law. So just a massive, massive statement coming out there, and of course followed by another massive statement by the Canadian Foreign Minister Melanie Joly, who said that sanctions, who was asked by a member of the Canadian Press Corps whether sanctions will be considered against India, and she gave a brief answer, but she also said that nothing will be off the table, everything is on the table. So you can see that this may not be the end of this diplomatic saga between India and Canada. So there you have it, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau coming out and making his statement saying that we strongly believe that we have evidence that we have presented to the Indian government. We asked Indian government officials to, we asked the Indian government to waive the diplomatic immunity of 6 diplomats in Canada. India refused, and therefore we were forced to expel them. Remember, this is a point of dispute where the Canadians are saying we have expelled these Indian diplomats, whereas the Indian government has said that we have withdrawn them. Of course, India has also responded with the expulsion of 6 Canadian diplomats, so a proportional measure. Now, we've talked about the statements. That was the big overnight development. The Canadian Prime Minister coming out is with the Canadian Foreign Minister to make clear what where the issue stands at this point in time. The Canadian Foreign Minister also said something very interesting, which I think is going to be very crucial in defining how this controversy moves on in the days, weeks, and months ahead. She is in touch with the foreign ministers of the Five Eyes. The Five Eyes, of course, is the intelligence network, including the United States, United Kingdom, as well as Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. It is a very, very tight intelligence alliance. She said that she's in touch with the foreign ministers of these countries. Of course, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau also spoke with the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, Keir Starmer, and released a statement saying that the two leaders will stay in close touch about this issue. So, of course, Justin Trudeau briefing Keir Starmer, and I'm sure he's also going to be trying to brief other world leaders as well. But very interestingly, the British Prime Minister's office has not released a statement on this. They haven't released a statement about expressing concern or talking about this just yet, which may indicate that these countries, while they may or may not, they may be concerned by what Canada is saying, are not really going to get involved in this crisis between India and Canada. That remains their position at this point in time, but we will have to continue to see how that evolves. But really, this is now going to be, I said that I would explain why this matters, because what I think is going to happen is that there's going to be a major battle for diplomatic narratives, for controlling the narrative in a number of crucial countries. Indian diplomats, I'm sure, will be going around briefing their counterparts, explaining their perspective, because remember, India does not want its diplomatic relationships with these other countries to suffer. It does not want to embolden groups within these countries that sort of say that India is a backsliding democracy, it's engaging in transnational repression, that Khalistani Sikh activists are somehow heroes in this story. It needs to dispel that assumption, and that is what India will be doing. Canada, of course, will be trying to put across its perspective on this key issue, but that diplomatic battle, that battle for the global public attention, to get their narrative out, is going to be absolutely crucial in the days, weeks, and months ahead. Now, another important thing that was an overnight development, of course, it happened last night, but there was a article by the Washington Post, which detailed to some extent how Western officials are seeing what is happening. Remember that the Washington Post, I'm sure, has been briefed by senior Western officials on how Canada is seeing what is happening, and their view is very clear that that Amit Shah, the Home Minister of India, was someone who may have approved intelligence collection as well as strikes against pro-Khalistan activists in Canada. Of course, several of these people are people that India believes are violent criminals. Some are designated terrorists. So India has taken this step and very directly naming Home Minister Amit Shah, which is a massive, massive development. To name really the second most powerful man in India as someone who has authorized foreign killings on your soil is really something that is obviously going to provoke some sort of retaliation from India. Remember that the Indian Ministry of External Affairs in its statement yesterday said that India reserves the right to retaliate to what it sees as Canada's extremism on this issue and Canada's refusal to act and Canada's investigation of Indian diplomats. Of course, we saw then the expulsion of Indian of Canadian diplomats in India, but we are likely, I think, to see some more steps being taken in the weeks and months ahead. Now, what does this mean for bilateral ties? Well, effectively, they're dead in the water. I don't think that anyone who's hoping for a bilateral free trade agreement, for cooperation on defense, and so on and so forth, is going to be happy to see something like this, because it effectively means that political trust is dead between the two countries. The Canadian government has come out and, of course, made a very, very public allegation against the government of India, which the government of India is not going to entertain, that the government of India has dismissed as a smear campaign by the Canadian government. It has directly attacked Justin Trudeau and his Liberal administration. So that is going to be a massive, massive problem for India-Canada relations going forward. It does not seem that they will recover until Justin Trudeau remains Prime Minister, which, of course, by various opinion polls show that if he goes to fight an election, he will not win that election. He's deeply unpopular at home. But the problem is also this, that the Conservative leader of opposition, who is Pierre Poilievre, has also come out with a statement where he says very clearly that, look, these are very concerning allegations that have been made by Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, that no foreign interference by any country, including India, should be allowed in this way. Now, having made this statement, the Conservative Party, even though it is the opposition party, is also making its position on this clear, and having made these public allegations, until this issue goes away, it is unclear whether the India-Canada relationship can really recover, because this is always going to be a sticking point in the bilateral relationship. Someone I was speaking to, a senior diplomat, was telling me that even if Justin Trudeau is defeated in the upcoming elections, the toxicity that this conversation has reached in terms of public narrative, etc., that any improvement of relations with Canada from the Indian side will involve Canada backtracking on this issue. But Canada cannot backtrack on this issue because it's publicly now made these allegations, publicly, because it said of the scale of these activities, it has had to make these public revelations against India. And because of that, even Canada can't back down. So it is difficult to see immediately whether the bilateral relationship can recover, even if there is a change of government in Canada. But lots of conversations today about the fact that on trade, a free trade agreement no longer seems possible. What will this mean for students and immigration? Will this damage the consular dialogue between India and Canada? And also, what does this mean for defense? We're seeing some reporting or some conversations, at least on social media. This is, please take it with a pinch of salt, about how India has defense projects with the United States that also include some Canadian input, including the Striker vehicles that the Indian armed forces are going to be interested in. That has been a topic of conversation between India purchasing these vehicles, and if there is a Canadian input in these Striker vehicles, then it is going to be much more difficult, because defense, cooperation and technology, it requires a great deal of strategic trust between countries. And at this point in time, it seems that strategic trust is completely dead between India and Canada. So it could impact a key defense agreement. It could impact trade agreements that India and Canada had hoped to do. It could impact the investment climate. It could impact immigration. You would also recall that tensions between India and Canada can also have an impact on how people perceive Canada and whether it is a safe country to live, to work, to study in. So at this point in time, we will continue to keep you updated on the latest from this story. We also have Geeta Mohan, our executive editor, on the ground in Islamabad for the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit. Remember, Dr. Jaishankar, External Affairs Minister Jaishankar, who's been conspicuously absent when it comes to this story, has not said very much, is going to be in Islamabad for this crucial multilateral meeting. We will keep you absolutely updated on that, as well as on the story with Canada. Thank you so much for watching India Today Global with me, Shashank Mattu. We will absolutely come back